I'm Jonathan. I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO at Talisman. And this is going to be a lot less of a demo-y session. So you can kind of rest assured there's no live coding. There's no like deep dives into product stuff. It's time to rest that half of your brains a little bit. And that's because we're going to be covering some kind of unique to Substrate and unique to Talisman or unique to Polkadot features that allow you to build a really, really next level application in the ecosystem. And I hope there's something in here for everybody. So whether you are a veteran, air quotes, front-end developer in the ecosystem and you've built a few, or you're a beginner, or you're a runtime engineer and you're building the palettes that we have to interact with, or you're just an observer and want to learn more about the ecosystem, I hope that there's something in here for everybody. And that's because we're going to be kind of breaking this talk into two sections. Firstly, a few tips and tricks on how to build a next level Substrate application today. So 5 or 6 things which you can do with your front-end application with either Substrate, Talisman, or Polkadot that allows you to build an application that really kind of stands out in terms of user experience and the product offering that you can offer to everybody. And then we kind of take a look in the future a little bit and say, we're still not exactly at the ceiling of where Substrate can be. So what are some of the things that we can do over the next 12 to 18 months that kind of helps bubble up some of the like unique features of Substrate, and we can bubble these up into the application. And I think this is kind of timely because Substrate is reasonably stable. I know we have the breaking change to weights coming up, but the ecosystem is kind of maturing. We've got kind of reasonably stable Substrate releases, the parachain shipping functionality. So now it's time for us all to pay attention to the user experience and start bubbling up some of the capabilities of our tech stack to the user so we can kind of sing the best praises of what this ecosystem has built. And then I can kind of outline some next steps on how we can get closer to the points raised in number 2 and kind of lead the charge on a few of the things that we'll cover. But firstly, who is Talisman and what are we building? We are building a couple of products. Firstly, a browser extension wallet for the ecosystem and a web dashboard that surfaces your portfolio view and can let you participate in different opportunities like crowd loans or staking. And this is done with a heavy, heavy focus on user experience. So I kind of perceive our job is to reason from first principles and say, look, we're in an ecosystem that has a lot of unique technology and we can't like just inherit patterns from Ethereum or other ecosystems. It's really our job to start thinking about how we can bubble up Substrate to the user in a kind of reasonable and first principles way. And that's the mission at Talisman, and we've been doing this for about 1.5 years. And when I say this, it's kind of building with Substrate in the browser, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So that's the presentation, and that's us. And let's think about how you can build a next level Substrate application with Talisman today. And the first thing you can do is to light clientize your front end with Substrate Connect. There was kind of a lot of discourse on Twitter over the past like fortnight or 2 weeks where it was known that Infura and MetaMask were, I don't know, scraping users' data or something like that. And we have a little bit of a different pattern in Substrate land where the onus to specify the endpoint that your users are reliant on to kind of submit and propagate your extrinsic to the network, that's actually your guys' job, not necessarily the browser extension. We have our own endpoints and light clients or whatnot to retrieve state and propagate the extrinsics that we craft. But for the extrinsics that you craft in the application, that's the kind of the job of the front-end developer to define that endpoint for the user. And you can kind of achieve the gold standard. Forget an endpoint or forget like a private RPC provider. You can light clientize your application with Substrate Connect. What this essentially means is instead of specifying some remote node, you turn the user's browser into its own light node. So the user becomes their own peer on the peer-to-peer network. And this has lots of amazing benefits, you know, avoiding front running and censorship resistance and whatnot. You can check out some of the talks that Polkadot Decoded for that. But all you need to know is that you can do this mammoth change in your application today with Substrate Connect. And what's required for this kind of large change in architecture? Well, it turns out it's devilishly easy. you probably have something that looks a little bit like this in your front-end application. You're instantiating the WebSocket provider object with some RPC, and then you can use that to either create an instance of the Polkadot.js API or just open a WebSocket connection directly to that node. And if you want to go from this kind of regular setup into an application which is light clientized, all you really need to do, at least for a relay chain, is just import the Substrate Connect provider object and just like a well-known chains utils package from the Substrate Connect library. And then you might have some kind of a flag to determine whether the user wants to run a light client or not. And just instantiate the Substrate Connect provider instead of the WebSocket provider with the information from this well-known chains object. And connect it, make sure that you can catch some possible errors, and then it's exactly the same from here on in. So this is kind of devilishly easy for a really large change in the trust assumptions that your user is making when you're using the application. Now, if you want to do this for a parachain, it's a little bit different because you have to specify or create a Substrate Connect provider instance for the relay chain that your parachain is a part of. So if it's Akala, then you want the Polkadot relay chain Substrate Connect provider. But if it's Karura, the Kusama parachain, you want the Kusama Substrate Connect provider. But it's kind of a similar experience from here on in. Just make sure that the user might know what you're doing so that you can handle any like loading and syncing states. And just instantiate the SC provider instead of the WebSocket provider. With the parachains, you'll also need a parachain chain spec, but you can get these on GitHub and coordinate with the parachain teams to find them and make sure that it's compatible. But this is probably the highest consequence change for the lowest amount of effort you can get in the ecosystem. It's really impressive. And really the kudos goes to the Substrate Connect team, Pierre and Nikos, and all the guys at Parity that have created this library, because it doesn't take long to integrate, and the benefit you get for kind of trustlessness and unstoppability in your application is kind of unparalleled. And we're really the only ecosystem that can do something like this, run a light client in the browser. So give it a go, and this is really something to like shout to the hills about, because this is incredibly important for Web3. Now, the second thing you might be able to do, and this is kind of more of a showcase of what we're doing in the wallet, but there are some implications for dApp developers, is decoding extrinsics. And this is something which I don't think I've really seen many people talk about, but it's something that we're really kind of excited about at Talisman, and we do leverage at the moment, but I think it's going to be a lot better, and kind of more on that later. So what I mean is that we can use the documentation in the extrinsic palette code, and we can surface this documentation inside of the wallet, because this is totally queryable. So we can just ask the node, hey, give me all of the documentation for this palette, and this includes some kind of human-readable description of the extrinsic, and then we can show that to the user. If this was to be achieved in another ecosystem, like a smart contract ecosystem, you might need to upload the smart contract source code to some place, and that's verified, and then the user is incurring lots of different trust assumptions in order to get the same kind of human readability on the transaction. But in Substrate, this is just totally queryable from the node, and this is really amazing for kind of the usability of the approval window inside of the extension. We also do this in the extension for some common Ethereum methods, because we're also an EVM-compatible wallet. So for all of these, you can expect like some kind of customized approval window inside of the Talisman extension. I think we're pulling the media from an NFT from IPFS as well to provide that context to the user. Now, the implication for the dApp developers here is to always know that we will be showing this information inside of the approval window. So that might include kind of the extrinsic name and the palette name and the description. So if you want to kind of blur the lines between where the user experience and the comprehension of the transaction in the dApp starts inside of the front end that you build, and then where it kind of ends in the approval window of the extension, keep in mind that we're showing this. So you might want to have tooltips inside of your extension that include the extrinsic name, the palette name, the description, and then that will be mirrored, and it will be coherent with what we're showing in the extension. so that the user has some kind of intuitive understanding that the action they initiated inside of the front end is the same action they're going to be approving inside of the extension. But this can be a lot better. I mean, we don't even do the complete sentence here. I think we just get the first line. So there's more on this later. But this is something that I think is kind of underutilized at the moment, and we should make use of the fact that this is just totally queryable, which is kind of nice. Yeah, and if you wanted to get this in your dApp so that you can make the same kind of information available, there are some kind of 2 human methods available on the generic extrinsic type, which is pretty handy. And then for runtime developers, I'm going to focus on you a little bit. Assume that the user will read the description you write. This description is no longer just for like you and your colleagues for the palette. This is also for the users to comprehend the transaction and the action that they're about to be approving. So keep that in mind when you're writing your palettes. This is something that's queryable. It's something that's surfaced in Talisman currently. And I think it's something that more and more applications should start to use. So keep that in mind when you are writing your palettes. And another thing to watch out for is kind of these wrapped extrinsics that we find in some applications. And this is actually a downstream consequence of a really amazing usability feature, which is the ability to pay for an extrinsic in a number of different tokens. So I think on the Akala dApp, you can pay for like your create vault extrinsic with a number of different tokens, so you don't have to have like ACA or something to make actions on the chain. But what this does is it always submits the same extrinsic from the front end, no matter what action you're doing. It's this kind of wrapped extrinsic where you just make the transaction payment with a different token, and it negates the ability to get the metadata for the extrinsic you're really crafting. So I'm not exactly sure what a remedy for this scenario is, but just watch out for it if you are kind of moving towards a pattern where you want to leverage the extrinsic documentation. If you are using these wrapped extrinsics, watch out for that because it will trip you up at some point. And then this is like a point for the future, but just consider standardizing the documentation in your extrinsic so that there's some consistent format that we can rely on to show to the user and some consistent fidelity of information. Right, another pretty neat and unique to Talisman feature that's available to all dApp developers is the fact that Ethereum and Substrate accounts are injected via the same object. And this is kind of more relevant for the parachains which implementing both EVM and Substrate. But what we found is that a lot of front ends have like 2 connection flows to the wallet. It's like connect Talisman Substrate, and then the user approves everything, and then another connection flow to connect Talisman EVM, and the user approves everything. And then at that point, you can do some XCM where you need to provide addresses for both EVM and Substrate. But since Talisman serves all of the accounts inside of the Substrate connection, it's actually an option for the user. You can just streamline your application experience and handle this all with one connection. I might preface that not all of the methods are available in the Ethereum account when they're injected via injected Web3. But for the purposes of just using the address as like a destination for some XCM, it's totally valid, and you can just streamline your application. And we can move towards an ecosystem of apps which are kind of coherent with the fact that we have chains that implement both Substrate and EVM, and we have wallets that implement both Substrate and EVM, and this can be all streamlined because it's a little bit inefficient at the moment, I think. So the only thing you really need to do in your application is just handle the different address formats that might come through that connection. We've had a couple of apps kind of error when they're expecting to see Substrate account through this connection, but the user has opted to also inject an EVM account there, and then they've just errored because they're not expecting that account format. So just make sure you know what you're doing, and that is a possibility that you might have to cover. I think this is code I lifted from the Talisman web app. There are some nice kind of util functions in the Polkadot repository to make sure that you're displaying your Ethereum addresses correctly. And this is like a minor minor improvement you can make if it's applicable to your application. Another kind of unique to Talisman, and this is, at this point, it's also unique to Substrate feature, and it's something that I added to the Talisman wallet in the past month or so, is the ability to use the private keys inside of the extension to encrypt and decrypt messages. So Sumi, who are a wallet-to-wallet messaging application, asked for this change. They would like to be able to encrypt the messages before they send them to their storage, which is public, so that they are private. And they would like to do that with the keypairs inside of the Talisman extension. So we added a couple of methods to the object which we inject into the browser or into the dapp to handle this. So if you want to build an application, question? Oh, you might use this.
Thanks. You know, Ethereum signed messages.
Yeah.
And they had to introduce like a little bit of, I don't know what we call it, not a salt, but a prefix, because there was an exploit where you would sign a message, but actually a transaction is just a signed message. So they're asking, you know, something.
Sorry, can you hold it closer?
So actually a transaction is just a signed message. So a malicious site can ask you, oh, can you just sign this? And it's actually signing a transaction.
This is just encrypting a message. It's not applying a signature. So I don't think you can use this message to kind of form a valid signature for a transaction on the chain.
So, cool. That was the question.
Yeah. Is that the question?
That was the question.
Okay, cool. So if you want to leverage this ability to encrypt or decrypt using the keypairs inside of Talisman, just pull the method from the object which we inject, and you just need to specify a hex-encoded public key for the recipient that you're encrypting it for. And then it's a very similar story for the reverse. Just pull the decrypt message function from the signer, and you can decrypt it if you are the recipient. Hopefully this is kind of live and demonstratable in the Sumi dapp, which will be launching at some point in the next, I don't know, couple of months. Hopefully you have to talk to them. But this is totally available to you to use now inside of the Talisman extension, and the documentation is online. So if you wanted to build some message board or something which encrypted information for different recipients, that's available now. And we're one of the only wallets in Web3 that actually has this ability surfaced to dapps. So this is a nice feature for you to utilize in your front-end application. Now, this is something that's less of a unique to Substrate or unique to Talisman feature, but it's a little trick or a little pattern that we use inside of the Talisman extension to create a really streamlined and fast and low latency or low bandwidth application. And that's to use the TX wrapper libraries inside of the Substrate repo. I think these are the libraries you're looking for. And essentially, these libraries allow you to craft the extrinsics that are supported in an offline way. So this is kind of intended for cold wallets and things like that. But we're using it to just circumvent and avoid using the Polkadot JS API. Because I think we've all been there, where you've instantiated into the Polkadot JS API, and then it's taking a few seconds to load the registry and get the metadata. And this just totally avoids that. So if you want an application which can craft an extrinsic in a pretty short amount of time, please check these node libraries to see if your extrinsic is supported first. And if you find that it isn't, I would implore you to open a PR in one of these libraries to export that extrinsic. And if you're a runtime developer equally, consider using these as well to make it a bit easier for front-end developers to craft those extrinsics without having to use the Polkadot JS API. But I will preface this with a promo of Cappy, which is the new kind of library to generate extrinsics and make calls to the chain. It might be available next year. Not sure on the timing, but that might be a better alternative than this. But until then, this is a super streamlined way to craft extrinsics, and it's what we use in the Talisman wallet, so we can just have something that's super, super fast for the user. So this is where we are now. We have a pretty good kind of set of unique features to make a really amazing Substrate application. You know, there's the encrypt, decrypt messages available for all you front-end developers. You can navigate around trust assumptions with light clients and extrinsic decoding, and then multiple environments available to you with the EVM chains, and then you can make all sorts of cross-chain applications with XCM. It's pretty amazing, and you can build a really, really kind of stellar application with Substrate and with Talisman today. But that's not the whole story. I mean, front-end developers still have to navigate around many address formats. The DApp has to do all the fee management, and that can't happen in the extension just yet. Wallet Connect support is a bit iffy. The method data we show in the Talisman window is still a little bit incomprehensible and not exactly digestible for the user. And broadly, we're still at like 2017 levels of key management and signing. I mean, the user generates a seed phrase, and then they connect to the DApp, and then on a per transaction basis, you're approving things. It hasn't really changed, and you can kind of characterize Talisman as a bit of a dark mode MetaMask with some really amazing flourishes that we can see at the top. So what are some changes or some efforts that we can make in the next 12 months to go from the next level Substrate application you can build today to something that really moves closer to the ceiling of possibility that the feature set offers? We can start to bubble up some of these characteristics into applications so that users can be a part of an ecosystem where just the bar is a little bit higher than what we expect in the rest of Web3. So I'm going to preface this with saying that this is just a collection of desperate ideas, and this is no means comprehensive or definitive. But here are some things that we might be able to do as an ecosystem to kind of move the bar of user experience meaningfully upwards and kind of beyond this general pattern of similarity that we have with most of Web3. So the first thing is to say, great, we can decode extrinsics using the metadata, and we can pull the documentation, it's human readable in some way, and move towards a pattern where it is really human readable and users can kind of comprehend the extrinsics that they're signing in a more meaningful way. So this is one of the first kind of mock-ups of the Talisman wallet that we made when we kind of first realized that we can use this information to create really customized approval windows. And I think this is the standard that we can achieve as an ecosystem. So instead of just leveraging the extrinsic documentation to just provide some description of the extrinsic and some description of the methods, we might be able to do some things here. So we could categorize extrinsics if they fall into a common bucket of like a use case which a user is familiar with. If you're an exchange and you have your DEX palette, just categorize the extrinsics as a swap extrinsic. Or if you're a lending protocol, you might want to deposit, or you're approving some token to be spent. You might be able to kind of categorize these extrinsics. So front ends and wallets can kind of make the approval experience and the user experience for that in a more customized way, like we have here for a swap extrinsic. You might also want to use this space to flag if an action is asynchronous, and it might take a lot more time for the extrinsic and for the action to complete, because you're starting on one chain and then you're kind of sending a message to another chain. Some action takes place and then it's returned to the original chain. You might want to flag that to the user. And it's also useful if state is being modified on a couple of different networks. Details on weights and fees, I'm not too confident about this one because there are some RPC methods that allow you to kind of estimate the weights and fees of extrinsics, but there might be some place in the documentation to include some more coherent information there so the user is aware. And the last thing is internationalization. English is not the only language in the world, and it would be nice if we can make transactions kind of comprehensible and human readable for everybody. So maybe we can orient around some kind of a shared registry for these translations and move towards a world where you don't need to be native English speaker to use a great interface like this. Now, this is some more disparate ideas, warning, about key management and signing procedures, but the two things that I'm going to mention here are both centered around the Substrate unique and the Substrate specific use case or feature, which is Proxy Accounts. Key management in crypto would be like this guy. This is one of the first tweets we made from the Talisman Twitter account. And I think it speaks quite accurately to the experience of custodying your own seed phrase. I mean, this is the squirrel from Ice Age, and if you haven't seen the movie kind of series, he is neurotic about the custody of his acorn. You know, he goes through like several different schemes of making sure that this precious acorn is safe, and this is a little bit like how we behave with our seed phrases. I mean, people are doing brain wallets, people are like taking words from books and making sure that they can remember their seed phrase in that way. It's kind of beyond the pale of a lot of users. And we can use the Substrate primitive of Proxy Accounts to start separating your storage keys from your signing keys to move beyond an ecosystem which looks like this, because we are still all this guy, unfortunately. So the first idea I want to kind of speak into the world and see if it gets traction is the idea of using proxy accounts as burner wallets. And if you don't know what a burner wallet is, I'll tell a little story about an application we made before we started Talisman, which was the conference wallet for the Web3 Summit in 2019. This was like a progressive web app that was native to mobile. You just kind of opened your browser and created an XDAI key pair. And then you funded it with a small amount of XDAI that I think we supplied at the conference. But at this point, the key pair was unencrypted, just whacked into local storage in the browser, and that meant the user could navigate this application on their phone, and every time they were going to sign a transaction on XDAI, it was just totally instant. There was no funny approval scheme to make the signature, and this meant we could do all sorts of things inside of the conference application. We had DAO versus DAO chess, where there was a plutocracy scheme to decide the next move, and then a democracy scheme to decide the next move, and we had the whole conference playing chess against each other in these two teams. And they could do that because the key pair was just inside the browser, unencrypted, and every time they voted on the next move for their team, it was instant, and the user experience was super fantastic. And I think we can use this idea and combine it with the idea of proxy accounts to create a really amazing set of applications in the Substrate ecosystem that are native to mobile and don't require you to just install applications onto your device. So how might this look like in a really kind of rough way? You might have your stash account. This is what stores your assets, and this is what you want to keep safe. So this is inside of Talisman, or this is inside of a Ledger device. You don't want to be mucking around with this key pair. But you can use that to assign a proxy account, and this is created inside of the application on your phone. This might be encrypted if you want to have some better security of the key pair inside of the dApp. And all you need to do is just make sure that it's filled with the existential deposit and any assets it needs for the transaction fees. But that's the account that signs all the extrinsics when you're clicking around on the web app. And you might be able to manage this relationship via some client that helps you revoke and assign the proxies, like Talisman. This is the same thing I just explained, but essentially the application that you might build if you want to go through this route of using proxy accounts as burner wallets is you just need to make sure that your dApp is responsive, because I think mobile first is pretty great. And then you just create the key pair inside of your wallet, have some process to fund that key pair with the existential deposit on the chain that you're interested in, and you can encrypt that with a password or something if you like. And at that point, you can just use that key pair, retrieve it from local storage to apply the signatures and propagate the transactions to the network. And this is all instantaneous, a little bit like the Web3 Summit wallet application we made in 2019. So what's an example of one of these applications that you guys might be able to make today? I present to you Treasury Tinder. This is a mobile-first governance software for OpenGov. You can swipe to vote on different treasury proposals, probably for like the lower importance tracks like tipping or something. And this is going to have a governance proxy inside of the local storage. So you might be able to create this application today. This is like a mock-up we made a few weeks ago. but you can just make sure that the user is like spinning up a key pair inside of the application, create the interface to swipe yes, no on the treasury proposals, and then have some kind of a process to assign that key pair as a governance proxy for your other account, whether it's in Talisman or a ledger or something. And this is risk minimized because if you screw up the custody of this phone, the key pair, which is unencrypted, naked on your mobile device, it's only a governance proxy. So if somebody gets a hold of that, all they can do is vote on treasury proposals for you. And at that point, you can just revoke that account with your original signer. So it's a little bit like your online banking credentials are important, and then they can just disable your credit card if you lose it. So this is maybe an example of how we can apply the proxy accounts as burner wallets idea. Now the second idea I would like to speak into the world regarding proxy accounts is to use the concept of a pure proxy and key pair rotation to set up your accounts as a user. Now a pure proxy account is a little bit different to a regular proxy account, where a regular proxy has limited permission to act on behalf of another account. So with governance, it can act on behalf of this other account only for governance actions. A pure proxy it's like a read-only address. I can use my original account to create this read-only address. It has no underlying private keys, but this is useful if you want to have a consistent home for soul-bound tokens that aren't transferable, or a consistent home for identity, but you're not a believer in your ability to custody that account. So you might set up something like this. The world's best onboarding experience in Web3, just Web3 auth into an application, and this is your signer to start with, and you can create your pure proxy. So this is your home base for your identity and your assets, and the first account you have to act on behalf of that, you've created with Web3 auth. So you've onboarded into the ecosystem in a really kind of smooth and kind of coherent or familiar way. And this is going to be in any proxy, so it can sign any transaction on behalf of your home base, the pure proxy. But you might want to participate in Treasury Tinder, and with this pattern, you can just create another wallet, and you can assign this as a governance proxy to your home base. And at this point, you've got two key pairs that have permission to sign on the same home base. But you might want to further this a little bit more and participate in the staking, and the same pattern holds true. So now you have three signers, one which can do anything, and two which can do specific actions for your wallet. But then you might think, you know what, this first signer has been around for a while. I've signed a lot of transactions with it. It was created with Web3 auth, so there's some trust assumptions there. I'm going to radically upgrade my key management procedure, and I'm going to decide to use a cold wallet instead. This is much more secure. And at this point, I mean, I think you might need to instantiate another signer to do the swap, but now you have a ledger to sign the transactions for your home base, and you've managed to totally rotate your key management principles whilst maintaining your identity, your assets, and any history that you want to accumulate on your home base account. This is great for something like accumulating degen scores, but you don't need to worry about custodying the same secret for the life cycle of the account because you can use this pretty unique and powerful primitive, which is only really in Substrate, unless you start creating smart contract wallets or something like that. So this is really powerful, but again, it's like a case study of what you might want to do with your application, your account management in the future. The implication for you guys, though, is that given an account which is injected into your app, you might need to determine the home base. So I have a signer inside of Talisman. It's injected into the application, but that's not the account the user's really interested in. It's interested in the pure proxy that actually has the assets and the identity. So an implication for application developers is to get your head around maybe some more complex account custody or account composition patterns that will exist in the future. But the main point that I wanted to hammer home here is that I hope that there's going to be a big tailwind into more varied account kind of composition patterns in the future, and we can start to move away from the create your seed phrase, back it up, connect it to dapps pattern, and to something and towards something where you are separating risk and minimizing the exposure to individual keypairs. So that's the tailwind that I think we should be creating, and this is something which is unique to Substrate, at least the proxy palette is, and this is really exciting. One thing which it's not unique to Substrate, but I want to kind of plug it a little bit, is a project called Sumi. These guys are doing wallet-to-wallet messaging. So you can, over their network, send messages to other addresses, and they use some kind of a storage infrastructure to host the messages, and that's what we're going to be encrypting. But you might be able to apply this concept of wallet-to-wallet messaging to your dApp. So if you're an application developer, you might want to notify your users when a position they have in your application is being liquidated. You might be a caller, and you need a way to contact this address because their vault is approaching the strike price. And that's a really, really great use case for this kind of permissionless, unstoppable messaging application that Sumi are building. You might also want to send event notifications to your users. They might have some new assets to claim or some new rewards to claim, or there might be some update or migration to the application that you want your users to be aware of. And then just general community management. Let's leverage these unstoppable messages in a really kind of Web3 native way. Although I might caveat that they're not totally unstoppable, because I think in Sumi, the user has the ability to kind of filter the messages which they can receive. But at least for now, we can start to think about building applications which have this kind of messaging functionality built in, so the user doesn't need to join a Discord or join a Telegram or provide some kind of contact details in order to stay up to date with the application. You can leverage just a Web3 native solution to notify users of important events like this. And this is something that I hope we see a lot more of in Web3, not just in this ecosystem, but all around, because it's a really nice primitive that's probably a bit unexplored for my liking. So this is where we are, right? You can build a pretty awesome application with Talisman today. You can light clientize it, you can leverage some encrypt, decrypt functionality, you can decode extrinsics, and all of the signing procedures are kind of conventional. Web3 users from other ecosystems are going to be familiar with how a Substrate app works, but there's flourishes. And that's pretty awesome, but we can do a lot better. So hopefully we can move towards a future where a Substrate application does have varied signing procedures, maybe with burner accounts and different kind of ways of custodying your secrets. We can move towards extrinsic comprehension instead of just decoding that metadata. And dApp to wallet messaging can be something which more and more applications are leveraging as a tool in their arsenal to make a coherent experience from start to finish. So my hope is that I can give this same talk in 12 months' time at next year's Sub0, and some of these items in this column are in this column, and there are more possibilities in the tomorrow column in 12 months' time. So that's the aim, but how might we get there? Here are some next steps for some of the items that I've spoken about today. So for transaction comprehension, let's work together with all of the parachain teams to standardize the content and the fidelity of the information inside of the extrinsic documentation. So instead of writing these for yourself and for your colleagues, write the extrinsic documentation for the users, and let's make sure that this is kind of equally coherent for every single extrinsic that a user might be submitting. And for internationalization, let's work on a proof of concept registry for these translations and get the community involved in making sure that users of every background can have a human-readable transaction experience. Maybe we can set up some kind of a registry to map those translations to the correct extrinsic, and then use the documentation to have an identifier or something like that. And for the application developers, if you choose, leverage this information inside of your application. So where I was talking about blurring the lines between the experience of the dApp and the experience of the wallet, using the same kind of identifiers, leverage this inside of your apps so that the user has like an intuitive understanding that the action they've just crafted inside of your front end is the action they're about to approve inside of the wallet. And for the key management kind of ideas that I spoke about with proxy accounts, I think the next step is just to hack on Substrate accounts, hack on Substrate apps with different kinds of key management procedures. You know, proxy accounts is what I mentioned in the talk today, but there are a lot of other kind of not unexplored, but not explored enough concepts. Like multi-sigs are still pretty raw in the ecosystem. MPC is something which Coinbase and other teams are working on, but it's not really something that we've seen in the ecosystem. Web3 auth is a good one as well. But there are lots of different challenges that you can be hacking on, like different address formats. There's a bit of a pain at the moment where the user is cycling through multiple addresses. If there are multiple chains, maybe we can see some more solutions there. And reach out directly if you want to do something like Treasury Tinder. I'm pretty keen on seeing more and more teams take this proxy accounts as a burner wallet concept and put it into practice, because the user experience we had in 2019 really was stellar, and we haven't really seen that being replicated enough, I think. And proxy accounts are a really great way to minimize the risk of those burner wallets. And then follow and contribute to Polkadot standards proposals and join the discussion which will happen in the Talisman community around these kinds of experiences and hacks, because I think the next step here really is just to tinker and start to push the needle on these patterns that help applications really leverage the full feature set of Substrate. So that's the talk. If I had to have a call to action, it would probably just be to rip TypeScript with Talisman. There are a lot of different things that you can do in the ecosystem that aren't necessarily available in other ecosystems. So I encourage everybody to give it a go and help push the needle towards a user experience which really bubbles up some of the unique features of Substrate, because I think it's time. We've got a pretty awesome ecosystem, and we've got a pretty awesome capability to build applications now, but it can be a lot better. So yeah, go and rip some TypeScript. Questions?
I saw in the beginning that you had a constant to toggle the light client on and off, and it was like user available. Like if I'm using the light client, you're letting me toggle back and forth, but I don't understand why I would opt out. Like from a user's perspective, why would I be opposed to using a light client? What features am I missing?
Yeah, the default should be light clients. The reason why I had a toggle there is you might have a different kind of loading flow if you need to handle the syncing state of the light client in your application. So you might want to have some kind of a flag in your front end to just differentiate when the application is using your light client and when it's not. Yeah, I would encourage every application to use it as a default and hide that behind some kind of advanced setting if the user really wants to toggle it because their computer's going to take off or something like that.
Hello? Yeah. So, yeah, really behind the proxy accounts thing, that squirrel thing is a real problem.
Yeah.
But there's so many patterns that you can do with proxy accounts, as well as you mentioned NPC. I don't know about that. Somebody mentioned banana split in the other UX thing. Do you think, like, how do we get standard ways of operating with this? Who should take the lead? Is it just like developers should hack it, or should Talisman do something, or Parity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's up to wallets to take the lead in a large way, because we are the application and we are the interface where users are creating their keypairs. So it makes sense for us to be the ones to kind of funnel the users towards some kind of usably secure pattern where we are encouraging safe but usable kind of key management practices for users. But I would still like to see people hack on this kind of thing. There are some opportunities available to application developers today, like Treasury Tinder, which, I mean, we can help build and things like that, but I think the tinkering culture is a useful asset to the community. And then if we start to see some really compelling ideas, obviously we can bake those into Talisman. But there are just so many competing solutions for kind of new key management solutions in the future, like a multi-sigs, MPC with the banana split, proxy accounts. And my intention at the moment is to kind of preserve optionality almost. That's why I'm a really big fan of this pure proxies and key rotation idea, is you can have applications which onboard users in different ways. They might do Web3 auth or a really smooth onboarding experience, and then the user can maintain optionality to kind of rotate that key pair management solution in the future if they wanted to. I agree, we should take the lead on this. But for now, the call to action is for application developers to tinker, and we will have to come up with like a future-proof pattern for users in the extension.
Oh, yeah. I didn't quite get the off-chain extrinsic crafting. What's the use case? Wouldn't you need extension to sign it anyway, unless you do it with private key?
This is just a general tip for application developers to not have to use the Polkadot.js API.
Okay, so it's without, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So you don't need Polkadot.js for it, okay.
Yeah, that's the reason why we use the TX wrapper. It's just that it's a little bit more lightweight, and it allows us to have a lighter weight code base and a faster user experience. And I thought I would just pass that tip on to you guys in case you weren't aware of this useful library.
Do you know any staking interfaces that accept proxy accounts?
So Talisman has built a staking interface. We haven't got the ability to kind of assign and revoke proxy accounts to that interface. But if you have proxy accounts inside of the extension and those are injected into the app, it will sign as intended. What I think we really need is a better interface to make those assignments. So that the staking interfaces can do what they do best, which is like seamless staking flows, and there's like a purpose-built interface for the assignment and kind of revocation of the proxies.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. Do you envision for the future that maybe the best kind of user experience would be to have a wallet embedded in the application, but not as an extension, but like in the final phase of the application or in a step, like as a pop-up or something?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might be up to the application and the user what they determine best is. But certainly having the wallet embedded in the application can yield a really amazing user experience like the burner wallets, where the wallet doesn't necessarily need to communicate with some other software to get the signature. Sorry, the application doesn't need to communicate with some external software to get the signature. The application can handle that themselves and create a really seamless experience in the way that they want to. So that's kind of the idea behind burner wallets. The only drawback is security, where you need to understand how is that key pair custodied? Is that posing a risk to the user to have that key pair just kind of whacked into local storage in an unsecure way? This is why the proxy accounts is kind of nice, because it minimizes the risk of that key pair. But you might be able to use like Web3 auth or different MPC solutions to also minimize risk. But certainly more key pairs and accounts stored in applications is a nice pattern, because it leaves it up to the application developer to do what they want with the user experience in a way.
Also, you mentioned like with Wallet Connect that there is not like enough. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. What was that about?
Yeah. So I didn't go into detail about that, but the Wallet Connect compatibility with Substrate chains is just a little bit unexplored at the moment. I think for the common chains, the chain IDs are kind of defined in the Wallet Connect source code. But for every Substrate chain, I don't think that we even landed on an identifier for that process. So it's just like unexplored territory for compatibility with Wallet Connect, which is a bit of a shame because it's such a useful tool. But we've been having conversations with Wallet Connect in the past couple of weeks to start to move towards an agreement on the Substrate chain identifiers so that it should be compatible with every network in the ecosystem.
Do you have the documentation of this talk somewhere, or the?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the slides are going to be made public at some point, but you can reach out to me here or talk to me afterwards and I can send you everything.
So, like one of the solutions for this burner accounts would be like, maybe you can assign a limit to it. Like if the account reaches like $100, then it has to be registered. But it's not like, so you're thinking of something like that to keep the flow easy as the account managed to get some value, and then it's necessary to do something to it.
Yeah. I don't think there's currently a proxy type on the proxy palette which has like a spending limit like you're describing. But that's maybe something that we can like lobby for in a way and get the frame team to add it. But there are some really cool proxy types that do exist. There's the governance and the staking proxies that I mentioned in the talk. But there's also a concept of a non-transfer proxy, which is essentially saying this key pair can sign any transaction on behalf of my other account, except transactions that involve a balance transfer. And that's a really nice idea that's available now.
The other thing, like when you were saying that the idea was to create a standard for having the wallets all when the accounts all work the same.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
When you were talking about creating a standard for accounts or all this format, you're thinking of something like we have in designers, like we have that design library and you just drag components and Tetris block it, you know, like you just launch it, then it's done, like something like that.
Yeah, there could be a future where the user has kind of high fidelity control over the way they manage their accounts. And it could be an interface where I'm going to drag and drop this concept into my account management window and that creates a key pair. That would be really cool. But I kind of believe in the concept of usable security, where you have to kind of make the most secure thing also the most easy thing for the user to achieve in the software. So giving people total control over just creating key pairs that have access to signing all these extrinsics might not be the best idea if people don't know what they're doing. So I'm kind of a believer in safeguarding their actions a little bit and protecting them from themselves.